What's up, y'all? This is the Chain Reaction Podcast. No intro music today. If you listen to our last episode, you will know that I lost my or destroyed my phone, and then the backup phone that I was using, which is also the phone that I used for intro music for this podcast, I destroyed that as well. That was kind of on its last legs anyway, but I made sure it was dead and is never coming back. And I haven't yet put the music on a different device to use. So, we're music free. Anyway, thanks for joining us. I am Jeremiah Mitchell, and I'm joined, as per usual, by Jeremiah Harding. What's up, man?
Nothing much. Selling shirts as usual. How you doing?
Harding inserts plugs for his stuff into his greetings. Just totally shameless. I'm doing all right.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, a little tired. It's a long night last night. Adjusting the video camera. Feels like it's been forever since we've done this, even though it's only been 2 weeks. Last week it was last minute. I found out like early Sunday morning that basically, long story short, the childcare that I normally have set up for this particular time was going to not be available, which it becomes pretty difficult to find, or it is just with my life right now, to find childcare on short notice within like 5 hours or something. So had to cancel our recording session. So sorry about that if you missed it. Normally, if something like that happens, I usually like to try to let you know ahead of time or release something just apologizing, but didn't get around to doing that last week either. Hope you missed us. So, any 4th of July plans?
I plan to stay indoors, possibly play some video games or some shit. I plan to see how bright the fireworks are through my bedroom curtains. Because I'm a bitter cynic, and I, can't stand going to the fanfare, and, I don't want to reveal where my hometown is, so I can't even go shitpost live at the local 4th of July things. That'll change once I move to a bigger city, though. I'll be shitposting live, where I'll do like a live video of me like going over and like man on the streeting the 4th of July celebrations, but I'm not in a place where I'm comfortable to do that yet, for multiple reasons. So
Any reasons you'd like to share?
Oh, I just don't want people to know where I live, because that way they would also know where some of the people that I know live, and I can't afford that yet.
Okay. Yeah.
I say too many controversial things online, like especially when I start making shirts that say things like universalized gun ownership. So I'm poking the bear, but I'm not going to do it in a way that's going to endanger people I know.
Okay. Yeah, that brings me to something that has been troubling lately. I think it was on the Tom Woods show. Troubling might be a strong word. Could have been something else, but it was that, and then a couple of other conversations I've had or saw people having online where you're getting real blurry, where people talked about how they say a bunch of stuff online, or they don't say in person in actual conversations with people. I was just wondering, do you find yourself holding back in real life conversations with others when it comes to politics, essentially, or anti-politics?
Here's the thing, like, first off, not really, but not in the way you might think. So, and I'm still getting over the illness thing, by the way, so I might be coughing, but it won't probably be as bad as it was on the previous one.
Yeah, I forgot about that. That was a long time ago.
Yeah, this thing kicked my ass, and it's during a heat wave, so
that's rough.
Yeah.
Maybe maybe more veggies and less energy drinks, huh? Get that immune system a boost.
I've barely had any caffeine, actually. Like, that's one of the things I don't do while I'm ill, is I don't have, like, a whole lot of energy drinks. Because, like, the way I see it, if my body needs to recover, then I need to not speed it up, and I need to, like, let it move. And my body is already, like, I think the docs were saying it was, like, something like my metabolism was close to 2 times faster than other people in my sex and age bracket. And so it's not something that I need to speed up anyway, but it's like I normally do just to give myself like a weird advantage over some other people. But I don't go hard with the caffeine when I'm feeling that way, because the way I see it, if sleep comes, I need to let it come.
Yeah, absolutely.
But to get back on the subject of me not me being ill,
Right.
So in person it's a little easier to do this, but I do it online as well. I try to gauge who I'm talking to and how receptive they are to things. I try to be reasonable about what I'm saying with reference to how well it will be received by the person I'm talking to. I'm not one of those people that just bashes somebody, unless I understand that they're not really in it for reason or some sort of empathy. Like, especially if they want to come at me with some, like, basic ass assumption, like, you know, Somalia or Marauds. If they start with that shit, then they need to be prepared for a sledgehammer. But I'm not. But that's true in real life too. Like, I'm not that nice a person. But like, I'll try and restrain myself and avoid being like overtly nasty when I know it won't help. But I'll do that online too. So it's less that, like, it's less that I do it more in real life because it's real life, and it's more because I have more tools available to me to assess whether or not the person is genuinely curious about anything, or if they, you know, just want to fuck with me. And if they want to fuck with me, then, you know, they're messing with somebody
Your DTF?
Yeah, definitely. They're messing with somebody who is used to doing this shit to a degree that has been called cyberbullying by people.
Phone's ringing.
Oh shit! Hold on. I forgot I had to hook up to this.
All right. Too. Yeah, that's just that's been something that Harding's dealing with some phone. It's just something that's been bothering. I find it troubling. Because I think one of the most important steps to spreading anarchism, voluntarism, these ideals, is normalizing them, is making them just a normal part of everyday life, where everyone knows someone in person that objects to aggressive violence, and it does so consistently, and an anarchist. And that these ideas are considered to be, I think if they're considered to be normal, more people will be inclined to look into them and to believe them, adhere to them. And
absolutely.
And in order to do that, we can't just be saying shit online. That's right. That's not going to work. And if people are withholding, explaining how a U.S. foreign policy is destructive, or explaining how honoring the troops results in people young men trying to be honorable, signing up to join the military, which is actually a very dishonorable job to participate in. Or if we're not explaining that the state is inherently illegitimate, or that it's impossible to be pro-state and anti-murder at the same time, that by endorsing the state, you're endorsing a system which exists through using murder as a tool to subjugate others. Like, if we're not clear about that stuff with individuals in our everyday life, then this message won't spread. And obviously the nature of conversations are different than internet social media posts. Like, I'm sure I talk about a free society less in my daily life than I do on the internet, at least as a percentage of my posts and a percentage of my conversation time. But it's just a difference. Like, most of my conversations aren't me writing down an idea and posting it on social media, just writing down my thoughts. Usually my conversations are driven. It probably doesn't come across on Skype because this is a little bit different format, especially when I'm trying to make a podcast. But most of my conversations are driven by other people. I'm more of a question asker than inserting my thoughts into somewhere. But I am pretty explicit with people, lots of people. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't really feel like I've shied away from any sort of conversation, and I don't try to put things in mean ways, but I do try to put things in clear and accurate ways. And if you're out there and you're afraid to speak your mind on this issue, I hope you stop. I hope you don't let that fear control you, because these ideas need to be spread. And people who are thinking this way and who are weaker-willed or more fearful need to be encouraged by seeing other people speak truth to power. There is no more evil ideology than the justification of aggressive violence. And the more people who are explicitly calling it out for what it is, calling out evil for what it is, the better off humanity will be. I don't know that you have any sort of moral obligation to do so, but, I wish you would.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing. Like, you say you don't think like your percentage of offline talking about this shit is very high compared to your online talking about this shit. Well, that's pretty much what I talk about. And like, I'm known around my local community as the guy who will talk about this sort of thing. Or the guy who's into Sonic, or the guy who is into industrial music, or the guy who's training martial arts. And that sort of thing, that sort of, humanizing effect, where somebody who can talk to me about the latest sci-fi or whatever, and also then ask me questions about anarchy, I think that that's a very useful thing. But primarily what I do talk to people about is anarchy. If I'm talking to them, it's going to be about anarchy. With very few exceptions, because I'll be bringing something up, or they'll be bringing something up where they're just curious about an anarchist perspective. And I'll give it to them, like, unapologetically. Especially like if they're willing to do in real life what people do online, which is so fucking annoying, which is come up with, like, button my roads or think about the children. I've got a lot of pre-programmed responses for those sorts of people, and they're usually not very friendly, but they do convey the point very well. Like, what about the children that are killed by U.S. bombs overseas? Do you not care about them? What about the fact that children are saddled with debt that they didn't owe or have any part in creating as soon as they're born? What about the fact that we're creating a hostile environment by having police that are more dangerous to our children than fucking terrorists? Like, let's create a better environment for our children. Let's create an environment of voluntary interaction and peace through understanding of retaliation. Some sort of, like, arm society is a polite society if I'm talking to a Republican, or arm the homeless if I'm talking to a Democrat. And, I'm willing to go there with anybody at any time, which is why if they have a question they want the extreme answer to, they come to me. And I do think that's valuable.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think like probably 50% of my social media posts are anti-politics, and probably 20% of my conversations are. So I think it's still a fairly high percentage relatively. I'm usually just more interested in what other people have to say or what's going on with them. Or maybe I just don't want to talk, and maybe it's not necessarily a positive characteristic. Maybe it's like letting other people kind of control the conversation.
Well, I mean, that's not necessarily a bad thing, though, because I've found myself listening much more than I speak, both online and in real life. Like, if I'm talking to somebody on like public transport or some shit like that, and I'm and they're like giving me what they believe and why they believe it, I'm not going to interrupt them, because it's sort of like, Sun Tzu Art of War kind of thing. You don't stop your enemy when they're making a mistake. And most people will fall into their own logical pitfalls. And the more you let them talk, the more that they'll reveal their own inconsistencies, that you can say, hey, you know how you said that? Well, that doesn't really comport with this other thing you said not too long ago. And they'll say, yeah, actually, that makes some sense. I sort of go with, like, because one of the reasons I'm an anarchist is because of people like Cantwell and Kokesh, and those people, you do the same thing. You go to somebody, you talk to them, you let them talk, and you then talk to them about what they just said instead of assuming anything. Really, you let them construct the demise of their own ideology, because that's really how it has to go. If it comes from you, then it might be a phase they're going through to accept it. If it comes from them, then it'll seem much more natural and like something that's beneficial to them, because they've reached that conclusion on their own. So listening is the first step to me. It's never talking is the first step. That's why a lot of the time you'll see me online, you'll see me retweeting other people's tweet responses to me, because, not only does it show that people are interacting with my stuff, so it is good for promo on some level, but it's also like it shows, it highlights that there's a conversation to be had there, and that there might be some changes that need to be made in somebody's ideology, and they might be more willing to accept that if it seems like it's coming from them than it is if it seems like it's being rammed down their throat by somebody else.
Yeah, I think that's true, especially when relationships are not necessarily distant, but if there isn't like a lot of depth and trust there, having them kind of figure it out themselves. But someone's got to bring, in order for change to occur, for the most part, someone has to bring a contrary perspective to the table, something that conflicts with what they believe to be true about their own life. I'm probably not that good at helping people discover flaws in their own thinking, but I am, I don't know, surrounded by, but I have a lot of relationship capital built up with a lot of people. If that makes sense. Like, there's a lot of people in my life that trust my love for them, I would say, and believe me to be a wise person. So that allows for a lot of boldness of statements, I think, that they will, like, where I'm almost shoving stuff down their throat, or shoving down their throat's not the right word, but putting it right in front of their face, and they still like value it, even though I'm not doing what you're saying, which is probably better. I'm just not that skilled at helping them discover their own sort of inconsistencies in their thinking, which it is true for every statist I've ever come across, or I've ever talked to with in any depth, that they are morally inconsistent individuals, and they do not believe that taking other people's property is right, and they do not believe that it's right when people use violence to threaten other people in order to force them to obey their will. They would, that's what they would say, except they do. But
well, because the thing is, oftentimes what I'll get anyway, I don't know if this is referential to the experience of other people. But the thing with my personal style of activism is I'll get them started on a subject, and I'll kind of lead the conversation in a way that will help them understand how what they're saying doesn't comport with what they feel, or what they think about other things. Like when Obama was president, it was much easier to do this. But like I'd talk to a leftist and I'd say, well, you say you oppose militarism, and that's really good. Keep doing that. But then at that point, I'll say something like, well, um, Obama was the first president to drone bomb American citizens, as far as knowledge would have it. As far as public knowledge is concerned, he's the first president to assassinate somebody who is American and joke about it.
Yeah,
and it was only
my favorite example of that. Favorite's kind of a weird word, but it's like funny in a very dark, tragic way. Is that he's the first Nobel Peace Prize winner to bomb and kill another Nobel Prize winner within the Doctors Without Borders hospital.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, you can bring up that sort of inconsistency, but it's much easier to do after you get them talking about why they like Obama. Like, he cares about the workers, he cares about the people. He was a community organizer, so he has experience with that shit. Well, okay, which workers, which people? Do they have to be white? Because if you want to oppose racism, and if you voted for him because you wanted some sort of racial parity, but he's bombing brown people overseas the same way George Bush did, using them as human target practice, for the cops that will inevitably be made from veterans, then I don't know how you could possibly call yourself anti-militarism or anti-war, or even against police brutality, because of the connections between veterans and police. The biggest veteran activists against war will tell you that it didn't change under Obama, except by getting worse for the people who are in these occupied regions. It got worse because we're now doing proxy wars, and the U.S. government doesn't have to invest as much into these wars, but to get the same result,
doesn't have to invest
so
troops into these wars, I would say, because the money that they've invested is still ridiculously high. I don't even know if it's decreased, but they don't have to invest. Like, when you don't have to send troops, it's much better for you politically. Or when the only troops you have to send are just like the Air Force, and when they can just stay safe in a military base and not actually be on the ground fighting against the Syrian government, it's very politically expedient. People are much more comfortable with the idea of bombing people than endangering the lives of soldiers.
Well, think about the cost reset, though, because every time a troop dies, you lose all of that time training them. You lose their connections. You lose their part in the command structure. You lose their knowledge, their intel that they gained overseas, or during operations, even at home, because they claim that there's no standing military presence, but we both know that's horseshit. But
the military budget overall increased under Obama.
Right, but UAVs are reusable, and the bombs that they drop are much less expensive than the training, housing, and feeding and clothing of one grunt. And so it's a much cheaper operation to send a UAV out armed with a predator missile than it is to send a bunch of troops over there to that same region, not do anything pinpointed, and risk losing them all.
Yeah, and there still are a bunch of troops over there in the region, all over the place. Like, they're still doing that arming and funding, and training and stuff. They're just not sending them into battle anywhere near as much as they did under Bush. And I think Trump will probably send more, because in this insane world, when you're a Republican, being pro-soldier means sending more soldiers to die in war and to fight in war. If you use them more, then you must be in support of them. It's one of the most ridiculous things, but
and that, you want to talk real world activism. That's one of the reasons I'm making shirts, because I have one that says support the troops, oppose war. And I think that highlights it, because if you want them to go into a deadly situation, that's not really supporting them, unless, of course, it actually stands for some defense of you. And most people, if they're being honest with themselves, will admit, no, it doesn't have very much to do with me, and it has much more to do with protecting opium and lithium interests in Afghanistan.
And the military-industrial complex and the banking system.
Oh yeah.
I mean, those are such big factors. I think these other interests take a back seat, or are just like the feather, on top of this already great weight of the military-industrial complex and banking system, which causes them to go in to one particular region as opposed to another. But they're always looking for more wars.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and the wars that they're in are all basically public works programs for school children, because if they didn't have the military, the intelligence agencies, if they didn't have all of these local state sucking jobs, then they basically wouldn't have most of the jobs that they say they create for re-election campaigns. So, obviously Trump is increasing the military budget. That's something that I saw on a Russia Today report a short while back. And,
just like every president always does, other than a little bit after World War II. But
yeah, and just in time for I forget, it's either, I'm just gonna scattergun here. It's either Lockheed Martin or Raytheon, I think.
Yeah.
That's building the F-35, and
it's Lockheed Martin, I think. Could be Boeing.
Possibly. But just in time for the F-35's release, there's a huge budget increase for defense.
Yeah,
and so
perfect.
obviously that's not to pad the pockets of some person that got the president or the one of his aides, one of his connected people in Congress elected. It's obviously not because of that. It's obviously not about slaking corporate interest. It's about defense. We've got to stop these terrorists. But instead of getting out of those regions and stopping radicalizing people and stopping sending funding to the people that are radicalizing people,
all these alliances with these terrorism supporters and these giant human rights violators. I mean, the Saudis are one of the worst groups or states in the region when it comes to human rights, and they have been a constant U.S. ally for as long as I can remember, despite them being a big part of 9/11.
Yeah, well, that's the real amusing part. Like, if you start to see who they fund and who they don't, they're considering pulling funding away from what was it? The Kurds that are fighting Erdogan.
Oh yeah.
And
a pretty major anti-ISIS force, as I understand it. Yeah.
And they're considering pulling funding from that, but they're not. He's not stopping bowing to Saudi Arabians.
Well, yeah.
He's just
no, of course not. I mean, the Saudis are the best. I mean, if you want to keep this conflict going, I mean, you got to keep relations tight with the Saudis and Israel, because they're a major part of the maintaining this constant conflict and provide different sorts of reasons for it getting involved. I didn't know they were going to stop funding going to the Kurds, but it makes sense because they keep trying to overthrow Assad, and if you want to overthrow Assad, one of the most important things to do is to keep ISIS and Al-Qaeda strong in the region. If you don't keep one or both of those groups powerful, then you're going to have to send the U.S. military in to overthrow Assad, because they're really his only enemies that are actually actively engaging against him, except for a few bombings by the U.S. and the Israeli Air Force. But the major on-the-ground fighters are all ISIS and Al-Qaeda.
Yeah, and he's playing 4D chess, obviously, when he bombs Syrian air bases. But and that was an obvious victory because all he wanted to do was scare them. But at the when he's playing this sort of little patty cake game with Assad, destroying really old military technology that Russia owns, nobody detects, with very few exceptions, that this could all be a marionette show, that everybody could be, very much on the same page for the same reasons, and that this conflict, I mean, you can't keep Mosul a hot zone on just simple terms. You've got to do it by maintaining a military threat there in the form of ISIS, by constantly funding their supporting countries and their supporting groups. And any group that will turn into ISIS at the drop of a hat, because guess what? Radicalization happens when you bomb people's houses that had nothing to do with the conflict.
And when you're eliminating all the people in the region who have a reason to prevent radicalization and prevent these groups from growing and forming.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I was going to... Something you said before, I want to get back to it before I forget. It was about the shirt. Like, support the troops by ending the war or something like that. Can you...
support the troops, oppose war.
Oppose war. Yeah, I like pointing out how stupid it is to say you support the troops when... that the people who say support the troops are often the people who are most... have the least qualms, fewest qualms about sending them into war. I'm having trouble finding words today. But I don't like saying support the troops at all in any context. I like pointing out the hypocrisy and the silliness, but that phrase is dangerous. Now, I'm not saying it's bad that you made the shirt or anything like that. I think it makes a good point. I always like to shy away from that, and I think I brought it up before, and I'm not trying to... Just having a kid, I want to be careful about not using him as like a puppet to make an argument, but having him makes me so much more aware of what kind of bullshit other people are spewing, especially as it pertains to who they honor, when the troops as a whole should be a group that are treated with dishonor for their job choice. And that would go a long way in helping prevent these people from signing up for the military in the future.
Well, that will help the people sensitive to that idea. But it won't help the people who are going in thinking that, we're the rough men here to do the dirty work while you sleep. That won't help those people. Those people need to understand that the people that they're fighting aren't the people that they'd be fighting if the U.S. government wasn't meddling. And they aren't the people that they'd be fighting if the U.S. government wasn't like in regions that they shouldn't be in. If they were literally defending the homeland, they'd be, going off and throwing mortar fire at Mordor on the Potomac, as Skip would call it.
Yeah.
we can't. So if you understand that there are multiple types of troops, then like the first step in reaching all of them is understanding which kind of troop you're talking to. If they understand some sort of ethical system already that would deter them from doing that, um, from joining in the first place, then yes, not saying support the troops would definitely help. But if their ethical system is based on unethical ideas like national defense for national defense's sake, or support the U.S. government no matter what because we just don't understand what they go through, shit like that, the indoctrinated shit, which is the majority of the troops out there, then we can't hope to reach them all. And if we really want to end these wars, we've got to reach as many of these people as possible. And that means essentially that while I don't personally support the troops in any other way than um, like opposing the militarism and the politicians who would send them to very dangerous locations for no other reason than protecting corporate interests and current footholds in regions where people have resources that they want to glean from. I do support the troops in those ways. I say, don't go into these wars. Be a defector.
Yeah.
Be a conscientious objector of certain orders at least, and say, no, I won't go bomb that village. There are children there, and maybe you'll get a dishonorable discharge, but understand that dishonorable discharge is probably a badge of honor, in any reasonable and realistic terms, So I'll go there.
Depending on why, but definitely can be.
Yeah.
I think just thinking about all the young ears around, or there's sort of this assumption that is present, at least in my region, that just everyone supports the troops because that's what you do. It's like one of the only things almost everyone agrees on politically. I don't know if that's my city or the Midwest, or if that's universal across the United States. But that's why I think it's so important to be providing a true counter narrative to statist lies. Like it's just such garbage reasoning to say that the troops fight for freedom. It makes absolutely no sense. It's just something that people have been saying and everyone else has been agreeing with for their entire lives. So it seems like, oh, this must be true because everyone says it, and I was taught to think it from a very young age, and no one disagrees with me. And I think shaking people out of that perspective is important, and reaching people that are young, that haven't yet had these ideas ingrained into their head, and who become aware at a very young age that such counter narratives exist. And if they are rational people, and if these counter narratives are presented logically and truthfully and honestly, I think and hope that young minds will be more open to new ideas, to embracing reality in the future. The reality is the troops fight for the organization that restricts the freedom of U.S. citizens. And the reality is that the U.S. government's foreign policy is driven by the interests of the political class, not the protection of U.S. citizens. And their deaths and their murders are a waste.
Yeah, well,
and it's tragic. And don't want to undermine how tragic their sacrifice is, but we also need to point out that their sacrifice was pointless. And I don't think that talking dishonestly about their sacrifice is helpful or compassionate.
It certainly isn't. Which is why, if you do support the troops, it shouldn't be a matter of supporting the troops first and then talking about some other stuff. It should be a matter of bringing up, like, because I grew up in a very military area, a very support the troops kind of place.
Yeah.
And my response to like doing that was I would talk to the troops directly, and that sort of thing brings a lot of potential, because when you start talking to the troops directly, then they have a chance to influence the other troops that are over there. You know, and that's, if you really want to support the troops as an anarchist, the first step should be talking to them specifically so that they can talk to the people they know, because that's the easiest way to get the facts known and to get change happening, is to speak that truth directly to who could speak it to power. You know, because going to Congress won't help, but maybe getting somebody to disobey an order because you talked to them in a Starbucks once, maybe that could stop some innocent people from dying, and that's good enough for me.
Yeah, that's true, because troops tend to respect other troops more than other people. They just feel like there's some sort of a brotherhood there, maybe a loose brotherhood, but it's still pretty powerful for them.
Yeah, and
Vic,
that's that. Well, I mean, because that's how you get to them. You have to tell them that they're damaging themselves and their brothers, and that they're also taking innocent life because of, you know, this collateral damage that is far too regular.
Yeah, and one thing that I think is true is that on average, soldiers care about, or claim to care about, freedom more than most citizens. And I have found that a helpful conversation route where I explain that I'm just for freedom and explain what that looks like. And it actually becomes clear to a lot of people that they're not really for freedom. They're just for some sort of, they're maybe for more freedom than their neighbors, but they're not really for freedom.
Well, and if they were for freedom, then they would be for the idea of eliminating the wars that we're forced to fund, eliminating the military programs that train violent thug cops at home, the idea of supporting these people, supporting the giant industries that are blocking out, you know, actual viable green technology. The idea of supporting the biggest polluters, as you brought up last time. It's fucking absurd. Like, there's a way to reach everybody about this.
I don't know if that's true, but I hope it is.
Well, you can reach them. It's just a matter of whether or not they choose to change after you do.
Yeah, that makes sense. We don't need to reach everyone, just a small percentage. I think 10% is enough. What do you think?
Well, I think 10% is certainly enough for some secession movement, and you know, and after that point, all we have to do is show that the people being attacked by the U.S. government are the people who have who are their neighbors, who are their friends, who go to church with them, who go to you know, who golf with them on Sundays. That they're just normal people trying to live their lives in a way that the U.S. government doesn't approve of. That's what we have to show.
Yeah. Yeah, I really think that there's just a huge percentage of the population that doesn't think. And they don't care to think. They're not really interested in ethics. And this isn't a knock on them, but they just kind of want to live their lives, go to work, make money, enjoy their relationships with others, watch their TV shows, and that's kind of all. They don't really want to be morally consistent, and they don't actually care that much about what happens in politics, so long as they're still able to do the things that they want to do and have the relationships that they want to have. So I think that there will be a lot less opposition to a free society than some people think. It's not like it will be like if 5% of the population was a devoted minority who wanted to go about creating a free society. I don't think that the 90% that were opposed to a world without the state would actually be that actively opposed to it. I think they'd just sort of be casually opposed to it, and then once they realize that, oh, this actually isn't that bad. I mean, my insurance is better, life is cheaper, I don't have to spend all bunch of money going to the state all the time. I can make more without working as hard. The value of my dollars, staying better. Or the value of my money is sticking around. I think they'll just be like, oh yeah, that works. That's fine. I can still do the things that I want to do. Might take a decade for these things to people to realize it, but I think that in a free society, people will want a free society, and eventually it will be hard to change the status quo of freedom, just as now it's hard to change the status quo of slavery.
Yeah, well, and it's going to be, because the industries of slavery have not gone away. They've been universalized, and they've been universalized to the extent where it's become odd to suggest otherwise. And so that's what we need to do. We need to normalize, like you said, normalize the ideas of freedom. Because if we don't, if it just seems like something that you can block somebody on Twitter for saying, then it won't gain any traction ever.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's easy to ignore the things people say on social media. That doesn't mean it doesn't have value. It definitely does. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how many thousands, hundreds probably, have had their minds open to the ideas of freedom. Hundreds of thousands of people because of the actions of anarchists on social media. It doesn't mean all of them have gone full ANCAP, but certainly they've spread, and a lot of people are close to that. I mean, I've even seen a bunch of what's that? Or
actual ANCOM, like actual ANCOM, like not the anarcho-communism that just wants to blow air horns at people at rallies, but the people who are building communes right now to try and subvert the state. Those people, to me, they have much respect.
Yeah, as long as they don't want to become a state themselves. Like, I have talked to very few ANCOMs who oppose aggression. Very few. The last one I remember talking to that opposed aggression, who was against, the initiation of force when it came to, a more standard kind of ANCAP property rights, also opposed aggression against animals and thought that people should be locked in a cage for hunting or for caging animals for food, etc. He was for you could defend your property against animal intrusion, but that is still still involves the initiation of force on people because of how they treat a rat, which is pretty insane. But yeah, I don't know. Have you come across many ANCOMs that don't actually want to be rulers?
I know a few of them on Facebook that are interested in some genuine solidarity, who basically their argument is that once people see how much more peaceful and easy it is to be in the communist end of an anarchist society, they will transfer over. Which, they might be right. I'd like to let the market test that. The U.S. government disagrees, obviously, and so do its corporate allies, and so do all of the hegemonic powers overseas. But I probably wouldn't enjoy that, because first off, there's no competition involved there, and second off, I don't think it has legs to stand on for a very long period of time from an economic standpoint. But if they could make it work, then more power to them, because they're against some of the same things I am. And while I might disagree with some of the things that they have to say, while I might think that, not all capital is theft, the ideas of opposing militarism, of giving the bottom rungs of society a fair shake versus the people who have been sending money down generations so that they can effectively force the same hegemony that's existed on previous generations on newer generations. Basically, the maintenance of the tax farm. We can agree on a lot of things, and I think that's important to realize. So I'm willing to do that as long as they're interested in genuinely in solidarity. And if they won't stab me in the back in the end, which I know a few of these people, and I know they probably wouldn't. I'm not saying they definitely wouldn't, but they probably wouldn't. Then I'm willing to entertain that, and I'm willing to help them where I see overlaps, like opposing the wars on drugs, opposing a counter-progressive taxation system by opposing the entire taxation system. The idea of feeding the homeless before you feed somebody's re-election campaign, that sort of thing. Like, there's overlaps that we can access, and I think that we'd be much better working together than working against one another. Like, especially since I'm not with Hoppe on saying that there are no place for communists or Democrats in a libertarian social order. I think that there are. I just think that it's probably not going to last long, which means that maybe there'll be more people that'll come more tyrannical. More like, this isn't working, we need a revolution. But those people will be relatively easy to quell if the only thing involved is people's personal spontaneous order and transactions in these societies.
Yeah, and I think the only way I think it can last is if people are just comfortable with a pretty low standard of living, and lots of people are, because you're just not going to have wealth creation in that environment. It's going to be real minor, the amount of wealth that's being created and economic growth that's happening. Although they probably would still benefit from the outside technological developments in the capitalistic system that they choose to exclude themselves from. One more comment, just quick on ANCOMs. I think a lot of the reason, or a lot of people are ANCOMs because they look at the U.S. system and they say, that's capitalism. When in fact, that is not what is going on. That's statism. That's oligarchical control over the most important parts of capitalism. Now, there is still some freedom in different areas, and we see a lot of beautiful things happening in those areas. But it is not a free market. That is. And then they oppose what's happening in the system, which is absolutely horrific, from the regulations to the banking to IP law to the military-industrial complex. Again, that's absolutely horrific, and you're right to criticize it, but that is not what we would see occurring in a free society.
Well, yeah, there's sort of a dual response I have to that, because you talk about standard of living, but part of the reason that America's standard of living looks so artificially good compared to other countries is because of these fake green initiatives. Businesses push these green initiatives, and governments push these green initiatives too. And the reason they do that is so that, and not just green initiatives, but also like the minimum wage, like that, because they know that this will only apply to Americans in America. And effectively what they can do by supporting these initiatives is shunt all traffic for all of these business things to the pollution with that as well, by the way, to places like Shenzhen, to places like Bangladesh, to places like Taiwan. We've got like green agendas that are basically fueling pollution across the world. these sorts of agendas are all supported by these people primarily because they know they can get away with it as long as they've got a place to shunt all of the pollution to. And so,
You mean because industrial production is occurring in those places? Is that what you're trying to say?
and
Okay.
so in an anarchist society, if that industrial production stayed there, stayed as fast as it is now, stayed just the same volume as it always was, right? Um, we would end up with in America a lot of these production facilities and a lot of the same pollution. And as long as people weren't willing to change the status quo, the standard of living here would decrease, but not unrightfully. And that's a place where I think communists and myself agree quite a bit, because we don't think that that the production that would be considered terrible here should go on anywhere else, reasonably speaking.
Well, I would say couple of comments on that. I don't know if I agree or disagree, but it's just related comments. I think that there would still be a lot of production like that occurring in those other regions because they aren't as wealthy, because there just isn't as much capital there. So wages are still slightly lower there than they would be, even if immediately, the whole world just became Ancapistan. So, but you are right that more production, just hypotheticals, more production would probably make its way back into the U.S. But what we see historically is a trend I think we will continue to see in the future, and it's that as regions get more wealthy, their tolerance level for pollution decreases overall, because it's the increase in wealth is people desiring, a higher standard of living. And once that's acquired, or even in most times in history, just desiring to get enough calories to grow, to a proper height. But as that happens, people then focus on other things to have a higher standard of living, which include pollution. So I think that the nature of the production would be cleaner as areas get more wealthy. It'll be interesting to see what happens in China and India. Taiwan, I think, is still one of these places as they grow in wealth per capita. What happens to their pollution levels if they follow the same trend as Europe and the U.S. and the pollution starts decreasing and they start becoming cleaner areas? I think that I suspect they will, but can't predict the future.
Well, what's really necessary to get this sort of thing dealt with is biome cities, where the pollution is immediately funneled into areas where the particulate matter, for instance, from the air pollution or the water pollution that's made of like industrial waste, is immediately funneled into like growing plants. There's actually something that they're building right now, which is basically a giant water filter for local water sources, so that the pollution stops flowing into those sources, and damaging the local ecosystems. Because currently, local ecosystems are being damaged more by like just the existence of industrial waste in local areas than they are by people like over farming or under farming certain animals or crops. And like this is a new thing for this planet. It's unprecedented. And so we have the potential to flip the script there, proverbially speaking, by creating biome cities. Like aquaponics has a lot to be said for it. So does a filtration system that also holds the materials so that you can later use the leftover carbons for materials, textiles and shit like that. And that's the future. The future is to not waste the pollution, but to turn it into something else.
Yeah,
and also the future is reusing shit. because like, and not grocery bags. That's just a jerk off move.
Yeah, that's so stupid. I mean, and we don't really have a garbage problem, but I want to highlight the point you just made. Well, as long as it's contained, it's fine. We have plenty of space. The point you just made is a really a good one economically, and I just want to highlight that pollution is waste. Pollution is inefficiency in production or inefficiency in the provision of services. And ultimately, what companies will want to do to maintain their profit or increase their profit margin is not waste anything. They want to use it all. So as technology becomes available and becomes more cost effective to use to decrease the amount of waste, all businesses are going to want to adopt this in order to make more money. So there is a motivation, a self-centered motivation by everyone, except for unless you're a state where all the incentives are thrown out the window, but for everyone to minimize their amount of waste and instead make it maintain its usefulness. As you pointed out, I think that's a beautiful part about a free society that's important to highlight.
Yeah, and you know, when people start getting used to reusing things, we'll start seeing less large of a landfill. We'll start seeing less large of wrecking piles. You know, because that's the thing. We do have a garbage problem. For everybody who says that I don't litter, I don't pollute, those people are, for instance, entrusting their garbage to waste management agencies that just chuck it into a truck, regardless of whether or not it's windy, regardless of whether or not they actually check and inspect each container to make sure that everything's properly bagged, regardless of whether or not the problem is much, much worse in corporate dumpsters where they have very thin bags to save money, but thin bags that blow trash fucking everywhere. You know, and this is just like the basic stuff. Like, there's much more pollution that comes from everywhere else. We do have a garbage problem everywhere, and that's just like the scattering of it. If it goes to a landfill, all that stuff that's in that landfill, with very few exceptions, will not be reused. And so you have like an entire, like, basically material repository that nobody is using and nobody will use, and that was used at one point only to be thrown away. And that sort of consumerism will need to stop, because there's only a very limited amount of resources that we can bury.
Well, eventually it will degrade and become a part of the earth. And if prices increase enough because there is a lack of resources, then people will start going to the landfill and
absolutely
reusing these things. Like the price system, I think, will largely take care of that. But I don't know if this is still true, but I know like 5 years ago, I think it was, that like waterways in the U.S. are way cleaner than they were in the 70s. So while pollution is a problem, you know, in different areas and different, you know, companies, usually all this stuff is they're just following government regulations, or they get special exceptions to engage in various forms of pollution. It's a status problem. It's a problem, tragedy of the commons caused by government owned, quote unquote, property. But despite that being an issue, we're still better off than we used to be, and I think that's an indicator of what I said earlier. Yes. So you and I, we are better off than we used to be in terms of clean water and clean areas and clean air as it pertains to smog and stuff. But
well, yeah, but a lot of our consumer goods come from places where they have artificial skies. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm not on a we level necessarily that would separate me from those people. I consider it, like, that's why I don't like borders. I consider it a global community of people, and some of those people are being fucked over by people from the other side of invisible arbitrary lines that the government creates. And so those people in Shenzhen, in Bangladesh, those people don't have really good water, and they don't have good air, and they don't have like the best air conditioning or the best living circumstances because they're making shit for us at very, very low wages and they can't afford that. And so, like, yeah, maybe our water is better here, and maybe businesses can make it seem as though that's an advance in some sort of progress. But what those companies are really doing, and they know this, is supporting the initiatives that would make their business cheaper by moving it overseas, so that they can then say, well, the people that we hire in America, they're paid extremely well, and the people that are in America have very good air and very good water. Just don't talk about Bangladesh. Just don't talk about Shenzhen. We won't talk about it if you won't talk about it. Go to McDonald's, have the same shit you normally do, and go to work for us on a daily basis with a clean conscience. That's what it's all about. It's all about lies.
Well, I think that as wealth increases in those areas, I think their tolerance for pollution will also decrease.
If that wealth increase is based in their personal capital, absolutely. If they don't have a brain drain where all of their most intelligent people go to America for better opportunities instead of enriching their local neighborhoods, absolutely. And if that wealth increase is not based in the same sorts of businesses that are existent over there already, making things worse, then absolutely. But if those businesses are the ones who are increasing that wealth, then it's not going to help remarkably, because all it's going to do is say, attaboy. It's going to increase the wealth a little bit by the same people who could decrease it at any point if any sort of rebellion hits up. And so I just don't have any confidence that that's going to be where things start to change.
I mean, it does happen in a lot of these nations where they do see large increases in overall wages as businesses flock there. I mean, it's obvious, if a business goes up somewhere and says, hey, you can come work for me if you want, they are providing another opportunity for people in that area to get their income. They're increasing the number of choices they have, and that is going to lead to potential wealth, barring different changes, lead to potential wealth increases because people have more chances and more options to make a living.
Well, somewhat. I mean, but that also sort of assumes that there's a static amount of people there. If there's an increasing population there like there is everywhere else, then it's not necessarily more options. It's just more places for the more people that are existing.
Yeah. I wasn't assuming a static population, but it is if someone builds a business there and now a new factory is there that wasn't there before, that is more options than were there previous to the factory being built. Regardless of number of people, it doesn't matter.
Why not?
Because something wasn't there, an opportunity wasn't there, and then it arrives there. So that is
but how
an
much
increase.
How much poverty of opportunity already existed by the amount of people that were there and then increased before that factory got there? How much of the need does that actually serve? That's a question that's valuable to ask. It does matter.
Right. It doesn't affect the truthfulness of my statement. That's all.
Well, not necessarily, but if these businesses are planning on having the easiest to exploit people because they're in the most impoverished, most terrible, most fucked up regions, the most polluted regions, then it's just feeding that small amount of the population that can then get a job. It doesn't address the unemployment there. It doesn't address the people who are dying of hunger. It doesn't address the global water crisis where there's water sources that are now too polluted to drink from. It doesn't address any of that. It just mildly alleviates the poverty of one region, of one province, of one country, instead of addressing the broader problem.
One small step in the right direction.
It can be if it happens a lot, but it barely ever happens.
It does happen, though. We do see a lot of wealth increase among the poorest in the world.
Well, how many
That's been happening for decades
globally, like in the past year? Then
I don't know, But I'm just saying, like, I don't
100.
I don't like talking about someone saying you can come work here for this wage if you want to, as exploitation. That's simply engaging in a voluntary, mutually beneficial economic relationship with other people.
It depends on who they're connected to. Because if those people are connected to the same people that have made the region terrible to begin with, then those people are directly exploiting those people. I mean, if
you're involving coercion in it, yes, but
who's made your list, if you come work for me, then that's a relationship that person didn't choose to begin with, being made, quote, better by a relationship that they never really wanted to begin with. So, I mean, I would say that it depends on who they're connected with, and I'd say that a lot of the time, who they're connected with, their business partners, et cetera, are the same people who made the regions terrible to begin with. And so I'd say that relationship, that part to the relationship, is like a good cop, bad cop thing. They're still cops.
Yeah, so if there's coercion involved, it's totally different, but that's not what I was talking about. I'm just talking about someone building a factory and offering people an opportunity to work there. That increases the chances of that region, and it increases the number of available voluntary relationships that people can engage in order to make a living, and is
Absolutely.
Overall economically beneficial to a region. I mean, if they're not paying high enough wages, they won't find anyone to work at their factory.
Well, absolutely. But I would argue that because of the way global finance is set up, those instances are far less common than the instances where a relationship works better for the business than it does for the individual. You know, or better for the business and their I guess a better way of phrasing that, better for the business and their corporate and government allies than the individual.
Yeah, I mean, definitely the same problem exists globally that does in the U.S. Corporate interests, business interests colluding with government to use coercion to crowd out competition and create artificially low wage rates in many cases, even in the U.S., I would argue. All right, we got to get out of here. Sorry for cutting this short. I don't know if I did, but yeah, let's get out of here. Oh shit! So the next two, I almost forgot about this. The next 2 Sundays, I'm going to be gone. I'm not sure what that means for this podcast and these episodes. Harding and I will talk after the show this week and maybe try to find a couple of different days to record an episode and pop it online. Or, you know, maybe we'll end up taking 2 weeks off if we can't do that, and relaxing and being ready to go when we get back. I don't know. Just kind of warning you guys ahead of time. I hope to have something, but we might have no episodes the next 2 weeks. We could maybe post up like a Moment to Rage episode or something like that. Maybe one of my old podcast episodes just as a replacement. We'll try to figure something out, but if we don't have anything,
I could probably do like Saturday this next week if that would work better for you.
Let's talk about it off the air.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, we're out of here. Want to plug anything?
Well, listen to Moment of Rage, smash the state, and find ways in your local area to decentralize so that you can fuck the system.
Sounds good. If you want to follow me on Twitter, it's at JeremiahJM. If you want to follow me anywhere else, don't. All right. Hope you all have a good week or a few weeks or month. You know, happy Independence Day. Enjoy your freedom.